I noticed in the back of the church with those saints statues that in the middle there is Saint Therese, who's a beautiful, beautiful saint. And there's an event in her life that occurred that set the stage for her entire spiritual life and ultimately blossomed in the fullness of her becoming a canonized saint. And she identifies it in her own autobiography called Story of a Soul. And so let me set this up for you a little bit. There was a custom in 19th century France that children would take shoes on Christmas Eve night and they would set them out by the fireplace so that their parents could fill them with presents. And that would happen in Therese's home so that they would come back from midnight mass and then put their shoes out and then go upstairs and the parents would put the little gifts in there. Now, she's the youngest of a whole multitude of sisters, and all of them have pretty much outgrown this, but Therese. Now, Therese is a very sensitive child. She will burst into tears at the slightest insult or the drop of a hat. Anything that she perceives that wounds her heart immediately gushes forth out of her eyes. And so she's 14 years old now. And they come back as a family from Christmas Mass, and Therese is the only one of the girls that grabs her shoes and she puts them right at the fireplace. And she starts to walk upstairs. And she's walking up with her sister Celine, and she hears her father say to one of her other sisters, "Well, thank God this is the last year we're doing this." Now, normally, this would have ripped Therese from the inside out. But for whatever reason, God chose this moment to puncture right into her heart with his grace. And he enters into her with humility in a way that she has never experienced before. It felt, the way she talks about it is like this dagger enters into her chest. And at that moment, rather than be overcome by her passions and rebel in this emotional outburst, all of a sudden, at great cost to herself, she accepts profound truth. That she is acting childishly. That her immaturity is annoying to her father. And that this ritual isn't really a good for the family. It's really just something she wants. And her family is over it. And so rather than blame other people or make excuses for how she feels, or maybe even just have pity for herself for her own faults, she does none of those things and instead accepts her imperfections. And it was at that moment she decided to go all the way. So she grabs that dagger of humility and she pulls it all the way into her chest until her main character syndrome and all of her ego and every ounce of pride is put utterly to death. And she decides from that moment forward, she will rigorously live in the light of truth. She will live the virtue of humility. 10 years later, she's already a religious sister hidden away in a cloister of Carmel, and she's dying. She's 24 years old. She's recounting this story in her autobiography, and she says in that moment, Jesus did for her what she could not have done for herself over the last 10 years. And her mother superior says to her, "My child, you are quite ready to appear before God because you have always understood the virtue of humility." And she looks up and she says, "Yes, I feel it. My soul has always sought the truth. Yes, I have understood humility of heart." The Word of God is confronting us with the foundation of the spiritual life, and that is the virtue of humility. But humility understood properly is, as Therese understood it, a surrender to the truth. It is a letting go of these great opinions we often have of ourselves that are typically loftier than reality, even if it's just simply our own self-importance. It's a letting go of the need to be right when, if we're really honest, we might actually be wrong. And it's a letting go of the pursuit of praise from other people in recognition that the only praise that matters is the one that comes from God, who is the source of real glory. And instead surrender to the truth that we are creatures who are limited, that we sometimes make mistakes, and that's okay. And that God alone is our glory, as he is the glory of all of his saints. But if we rest in that, we can honestly push that even further. You see, the truth is not primarily a piece of data, right? That's not what truth is. The revelation of the gospel is that truth is a person. Jesus will say that. I am the way, the truth, and the life. The truth is God, which means that the perfection of humility on a supernatural order is a surrender to God himself. So when Jesus is in the home of this Pharisee and he's watching them vying for high seats at the table and all this, consider his own context. Here he is the second person of the Blessed Trinity, through whom all things were made, who empties himself out to become a creature, subjecting himself to pain and hunger and grief, the entire spectrum of the human experience, all the while never striving for anything that is beyond his reach, anything that the Father is not giving him. Like you see that in the temptations. Take this stone and make it bread. And he says no, not because the Father doesn't desire him to have food, but because he wants that to come from the Father first. And so his bread is to do the Father's will. If ever a moment happened in Jesus' life where he imposed his own will in contrast to the Father, deep down, that would actually be a denial of the truth, which is he's not the Father, he's the Son. In the Trinity, he's not the boss. But instead, he chooses never to consider himself too good or too important for any humiliation that the Father asks him to undergo. And he knows that his glory really comes from God. So he'll say in John's gospel, if I glorify myself, my glory means nothing. My Father is the one who glorifies me. And as a result, he himself does what he's instructing the people around this table to do. Jesus goes for the lowest seat. In fact, he goes so low, he doesn't just leave his throne from heaven to sit on a cross on earth. He goes even lower to descend into hell and take the seat of a condemned man. But the result of this is exactly what he articulates in that parable. He says to the people, choose the lowest seat so that the master of the house can invite you to come higher. Well, going as low as he did, what happens to Jesus? The Father raises him up, not just at the resurrection, but all the way up until he sits at the Father's right hand in glory. And as St. Paul says in Philippians, and at his name every knee shall bend in heaven, on earth, and under the earth, and every tongue proclaim that Jesus Christ is Lord. And he can do this because he sees his own mother doing it, right? He gets this example of humility from Mary, who, if you remember at the visitation when Elizabeth is like just gushing praises upon Mary, Mary says that God looked with favor on his lowly handmaid. So that's the place that she takes. And this same God casts the mighty from their thrones and lifts up the lowly. It's the same image that the parable is employing. And it's the same thing that happens to Therese. She chooses the lowest spot that she believes God is inviting to her. Rather than compete with the rest of the world to make a name for herself in the public sphere, she hides herself away in a cloister knowing that she will spend the entirety of her life hidden from the rest of the world. And then among all the sisters, she makes herself even lowest to be their servants. And then even when she's misunderstood, she accepts it all and gives it to God. And what does God do in return? He takes this invisible, hidden individual who died at the age of 24, who was not known really to anybody, and made her one of the most powerful saints in the world, such that when I say her name, you know who I'm talking about. Because he raised her to a higher seat that she would not choose for herself. When Jesus criticizes the guests who are busy establishing their own glory, he's doing so because he realizes this undermines the spiritual life. Folks, if we want an honor that counts and a glory that lasts, if we want to be counted among the greats like Saint Therese, then we have to place ourselves last. We have to practice rigorous honesty. We have to bow and have the habit of bowing before the truth, recognizing at every moment who God is, who I am, and letting his will be enough.